Hi, everyone. Welcome again to Leaning In and Speaking Out. I'm happy to be here with all of you today. I'm Michelle Lamb. I'm the co-host of the podcast together with my fearless colleague, Dr. Jackie Kirk. And we're just going to introduce ourselves and then dive right in. So, Jackie.
Hi, I'm Jackie Kirk, and I'm in the Department of Leadership and Educational Administration at Brandon University. And I'm the chair of the grad program and a co-host of the podcast. And I have a few little touches around the building.
A few little touches. She does a lot in the building.
And I'm excited for this discussion today. This has been one of the discussions that sort of has maybe woven through my life for a long time. I grew up in a very small, white, conservative town in Saskatchewan and didn't have any exposure to communities of difference at all when I went to university. And after I was in university for a while, my best friend came out. And that really changed my whole connection to the community. And I did lots of things in Saskatoon with him and, got involved in the court system. And then we moved into the West End in Vancouver and we continued to, participate in lots of the gay cultural events and stuff in the city. So this is a discussion I care a lot about, and I'm really excited to have all of you on the show to share with us.
Yeah, so maybe just go around. We have Nora joining in person, and then we have two folks joining by Zoom. But Nora, do you want to kick us off and introduce yourself, and then we'll move it over to Gustavo?
For sure. So my name is Dr. Nora Wilson. I am the Associate Professor of Trombone, Tuba, and Euphonium here at Brandon University. I've been playing trombone for 29 years, and I am a trans woman, transitioned later in life, just started last year, actually, at the age of 38, and I'm very happy to be here.
Thanks, Nora. We're the same age, I think.
Is that right?
Yeah. Are you 39?
Yes.
Yeah, we're the same age. All right, we'll turn it over to Gustavo. Do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I am Gustavo. I use he, him pronouns. Originally from Brazil, moved to Canada back in 2017 for my grad program. And I've been a research collaborator with the BU Cares since 2021 when I was still a student, graduated, done some work as a research facilitator for BU Cares, but still some writing going on in there.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Gustavo. And Nathan.
Hi, I'm Nathan. I use he, him pronouns. I'm based here in Calgary, Mokinstas. I work for the Center for Sexuality, which is how I'm integrated in this conversation. Gus and I work together, and he offered me this opportunity to participate in this wonderful conversation. I come from a background of a master's in gender, sexuality, and women's studies from SFU. I've been doing research and adult education in the areas of sexuality, gender, and sexual diversity for several years now, and I continue that work at the Center for Sexuality here in Calgary.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And Nora, you're the one that kind of put this idea and this topic on our radar, and thank you so much for bringing it forward. And in that initial conversation, one of the things that you talked to me about was how your music has changed since your transition. And so I wonder if you want to talk a little bit about that and also what that might mean for people in education.
For sure. Just before I get to the music part of it, just kind of want to talk about what transitioning really means. And I think my friend Anastasia Gibson, who's a local trans singer-songwriter and psychologist in this area, she told me very early on in my journey that transitioning is not just about gender itself, but there's always something else along with it, some other demons to slay, some other issues to work out. And through transition, people like myself are able to actually work on those issues. And a lot of my things that I've struggled with for my entire life, which, fear of rejection, body image issues, intimacy issues, and addiction, just to name a few, these things are issues that I tried to address before I transitioned, before I knew that I was trans. And it was only once I was able to accept myself for who I am and all the things that go with it that I finally started to understand the roots of those issues that I've struggled with and that were just kept on getting worse and worse and worse over the years. And it was only then that I was able to start healing. And when I talk about how transitioning has affected my music making, it really begins there because when I was not in a place of wellness, of oneness, of groundedness with my body and everything, my ability to be a musician was stifled. I could only go so far with it. So this last year and 3 months since I came out to myself first have been just an amazing, amazing journey for me in sort of the betterment of myself. But if we go to how I have improved as a trombonist, I can say without question that I'm a better trombonist now than I was at any time before I transitioned. And it's not the estrogen itself that made me a better trombonist. That would be crazy, even though I know lovely, lovely female trombonists, so many great ones. It's not the estrogen itself. It's just the fact that my body is on the right hormones for me to actually function in the way that I was supposed to function. And through being on those right hormones, there came an alignment with my body and my mind and my spirit. And when you are operating from a place like that, it becomes much easier to do something that's such a physical act like trombone playing. It becomes much easier to understand what goes into it. Because when you're talking about playing my instrument, it's really quite simple in concept. I have to blow the right kind of air into the right shape of tubing, the right length of tubing, at the right pitch, which is usually determined, well, not usually, it's determined by the embouchure, which is the muscles around the face, the tongue, all that kind of stuff. And what's more is like the air that I blow into the instrument has to be musical. Well, if I want to express all the different kinds of things in music that I want to express, dynamics and articulation, different phrasing, all that kind of wonderful musical stuff, I need full access to my body. I need understanding of my body. And over this past year, as I've come into more oneness with my body, I've learned how I'm starting to really understand how the muscles involved in the breathing process really work and how they can enable me to do the things that I want to do on the instrument. And all of these things that I struggled with over the years on the trombone, it's like I knew them in my head. I knew the things I needed to do, how like I needed to blow musically and all that. It just had a tough time kind of packaging them up in the right way. And since transitioning, I just understand things easier. I'm much more methodical about it. I listen better to myself, and I have much more capacity to actually do this kind of work than I did before. Because when your brain, part of your brain is dedicated to hating on yourself, that's a hard place to operate from. So like now, since I have this kind of bodily awareness of what it takes to create music, I feel like I love my craft more deeply and more passionately and more profoundly than I ever thought was possible. And it's quite revitalizing after 29 years of playing the instrument to like suddenly feel like you're really starting to learn new things about it. And it's wonderful. In regards to what that means for educators, people who are trans or identify as any kind of gender diverse individuals, non-binary, genderqueer, all those different labels that we use for ourselves here, their potential, my potential, was limited by my ability to accept and love myself. And I think for us as educators, and I don't have nearly the degrees that y'all have with this education stuff. I have 3 degrees in trombone performance. But when we have that love for ourselves, then we can achieve more. And we as educators need to facilitate that as much as we can in the classroom for all of our students. And trans and gender diverse students especially need that extra care because many times they don't have another place for that care. They might have tough home environments. They might not understand themselves. They likely don't understand themselves at that point in their lives. And we as teachers, if we can show them that it's safe for them to be themselves and we can celebrate those identities and all different kinds of identities in our classrooms, everybody benefits from it.
Thanks so much. I love that you mentioned spirit, and it reminded me of a video that I watched very recently about people interviewing very old artists, and they were kind of famous, top of their field kinds of creators, and they were showing them art that was generated by AI. And one of the statements that really stood out was that one of them said, "Whoever created this doesn't understand suffering." And it was like the message that it's not just all of the pieces on the paper or whatever form of art you're using. Like you're saying, it's not just the, breath and embouchure and all the pieces. There's something more when you're aligned with yourself and you're operating and creating music out of that authentic place and alignment with your body. And so I really hear that in what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
I really also love your description of how much deeper the transition goes than what we might expect, right? And not everyone who goes through it is articulate like you are to be able to describe that. But the connections to what you learned about your body, what you learned about music, did you anticipate those things before you started?
Oh, no, I just thought it was going to be looking pretty and wearing makeup and all that good stuff that I love to do anyway. But no, it's... I never understood the depths of how much I needed this until I was actually going through it. And I suppressed my gender for a long, long time. I suppressed so much so that I had no idea, even though there were so many signs. I believe me, over the last 15 months, I've gone through like every aspect of my life trying to figure out, why did I suppress this? Why did I hold this back from even myself? But it's not until you get into the actual transitioning of it that you discover that all these connections exist within our body. And as for me, like the reclamation of the body itself, and I've done that through yoga, through trombone playing too, that's been the true transition, that transformation of the spirit within me into this person that I am today and the person that I keep on growing into as well. It's quite lovely.
Thank you. Gustavo, we're going to turn to you next. And I had the pleasure of having Gustavo into my classroom to talk about his research, I think in the fall of 2022. And I've been thinking about the things that you made me think about that night ever since then. And just like 2 days ago, I had a student describe to me experiences very similar to the participants in your study. And I said, okay, you've got to read Gustavo's dissertation because you will relate to the things that the participants were talking about. And I think you'll really enjoy, seeing what he found from that. Will you talk to us about your research and how it relates to you and your experiences and how it relates to education as well?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Jackie, for remembering me in class and suggesting me to your student. But in terms of research, I was invited to work in a research Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council funded research at University of Manitoba that was trying to explore how queer educators were navigating tensions when going overseas to teach, especially in countries where being queer and then, involving LGBTQIA plus individuals, places where being part of that community can, bring a lot of like lack of support to say, to kind of encompass the whole idea of how those countries treat individuals in that community. I was brought to the team as a research assistant. It was actually the first time I was exploring the whole idea of sexual and gender diversity in a research. Like prior to that, my master's, I was very involved in critical theories and critical pedagogy and more of a focus on language teaching and language learning. But I've never really explored that piece of identity, including mine as a male gay teacher, teaching language, teaching students how to become more critical of social, aspects. I was never really comfortable doing that. And I think I kind of said it during my defense that, bringing the cultural piece, it's a lot easier for me to be talking about these things in English than in Portuguese, which would be my first language. I still have that level of discomfort with, doing or writing about some of queer things in Portuguese, because somehow I feel like I kind of disconnect that cultural piece that probably comes with like taboos or like traditions or, all of those marginalizing ideals related to queer work. And diving into the research, I kind of was able to explore and exercise a little bit more of my identity and understand that certain levels of identity, they intersect, but at the same time, they make things a little bit easier, right? So like as a gay man, I haven't gone through the whole a harder time of being accepted because I still identify as a cis male. I still conform with my male gender identity. So it's a little easier to navigate certain spaces, including university spaces or classrooms. And the whole point of my research, my PhD research, was to connect how like the language we speak, the level of education we have, the places we come from, they make it sometimes easier for us to advocate for certain rights. So when you're talking about Western educators who are going to places like Myanmar or Kenya or, Egypt, they have a certain... They can be seen as like the foreigner. So people from those places, they can look at them and be like, well, it's okay if you're queer, but that's your culture thing. It's not an our culture thing. So when you're advocating for queer communities, who is actually benefiting from the advocacy work that you're doing in those classrooms, right? So just to try to bring a little bit more of a in-depth like analysis of those different layers and how that actually informs advocacy work. And I think that reflects like today as a recent hire at the Center for Sexuality in Calgary, that that makes me look for better ways to, navigate my own tensions, my own values, my own beliefs, at the same time bring me a little bit more of a comfortability to speak in different languages, in different spaces, and broaden those discussions so then people get to be not only socially accepted, but like socially integrated and, being part of like decision-making processes and discussions in general, which I think we might still lack in certain aspects. But yeah, I think that's a little bit about my my background and how I probably relate to the thing we're going to be speaking of today, and probably I'll delve into some of the details of the research as we move forward as well.
That's great.
Thank you.
Gustavo. I just have a follow-up question for the Western educators who were going to countries where gender and sexual diversity isn't accepted, and they were doing advocacy for that diversity. Were they doing this in a good way, like using their power and privilege from coming from a Western lens in a way that kind of opened doors and brought awareness? Or was it more of like it was benefiting them and it was not necessarily benefiting the local populations?
I can see it both ways. So like one of the examples I have is this veteran teacher. He is American and he was teaching in Myanmar, but he has taught in like places like Iran, Iraq, Indonesia, where tensions are like above proportions, right? Especially with war zones and etc. He was one of the participants I had who wrote a letter for a local gay man in Iraq. So then that person could come to Canada as a refugee and get asylum and, find that safer space. But at the same time, I don't want to say that they were not benefiting the local population from the countries where they were teaching. But when we analyze that, these educators were probably working in IB schools, which are like these international schools that, social class wise, people are paying to be in those schools. So there are certain demands and requirements to follow in terms of curriculum, in terms of teaching and learning outcomes. Navigating those little bits and beats as well was like, well, I'm already married with, a same-sex partner. People know, students are seeing, and I think that that's an advocacy that we're doing for the community so they can see us as role models. So that very subtle sort of like advocacy work. Meanwhile, there was another non-binary teacher believe it or not, at a Jewish school, I believe, in Thailand, and they were trying to bring like books for the kids in elementary school to approach queer aspects in education, but they were getting vetted by the school board in order not to promote those types of discussions in class. So like you could see people who were just starting in their careers and they thought, well, this is not really the right moment for me to be approaching these topics in my day-to-day class. But if the subject comes up, I'm open to talking to it. And on the other side of the spectrum, you see people really trying to move forward with things and include those discussions. And where like places where systems, the school system, the laws, they were a little bit more tricky to navigate. So I think you could see a little bit of everything. Yeah. And I wouldn't just put it on the teachers to do the work. It is a systemic kind of a barrier. And I think that it goes a little bit further than, just what they're doing or how they're doing things.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense. And the topic of book bannings is pretty relevant to us here in Brandon, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could hear from you, Nathan. Do you want to share a little bit about your work and your research? Anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I think specifically from the work that I do at the center. So in the training center, we do capacity building workshops and continuing education and supports for lots of different professionals in a variety of different disciplines. And that, of course, includes teachers and other school administrators. So I do a lot of work with practicing teachers, with pre-service students, but also as well with school boards, school administrators, and so on. So it really is, again, providing people with there's kind of multiple levels to it. I see it's one, a shared understanding of gender and sexual diversity, and understanding the nuances of that conversation is kind of the baseline, I think. But then also thinking about ways in which that they can create inclusive and supportive environments for the students that they're engaging with. So there's lots of different ways that we navigate that conversation, and it depends also on where someone's coming from. If they're a teacher or a school administrator or someone that's working for a broader school board. So with the work, again, I think what I hear from working with people kind of face to face is really understanding what is supportive, right? Like what is actually beneficial for students, and how those broader school directives, those things like safer space policies, inclusive policies, school board commitments, how those can really be put into action. And a lot of those policies are really well-intentioned and they're important, right? So they outline different values, different ideas that are really foundational to creating a safe and supportive school environment. But how are they put into practice, right? What are the ways that educators can be supported in putting those things into practice to really have impacts on the ground? And I think that connects to a lot of what you shared, Nora, from your experience, is really acknowledging, right, when youth, gender and sexually diverse youth are in school environments and they're experiencing a lack of support, a lack of recognition, affirmation, and they can't feel that they can be their authentic selves at school, it has huge impacts on learning outcomes, right? Education outcomes for those youth, and also ability to continue to stay in school, right? When we think of bullying in terms of overt bullying, and then as well, just a lack of support and response from school administrators and teachers. And again, it's not saying that these people aren't doing great work. Of course they are, but where are those supports and those directives coming from kind of higher up? So it's an interesting space to be in, is providing this information and support, and really calling a lot of educators to sort of work in that gray area of supporting youth and following the youth's lead, but not having clear and consistent directions sometimes in how to move forward with that. So that's how that shows up in my work. And I find it endlessly fascinating. And it's something that, again, it's also from a personal place, right? It's looking for what I needed or what I would have liked to have seen, as a youth in school environments. And I think there's some great work happening. There's some great things happening. It's just also supporting those educators and doing this work and what that looks like.
Thanks, Nathan. I think that's a really nice lead in to the other part of the discussion that's talking about the dangers that face queer children and youth in schools and what you think educators need to know. And I think we can sort of open up that question to people who want to jump in. So feel free to.
I grew up not knowing who I was, and I, for the longest time masqueraded as a cisgendered man. And when I think about the dangers facing queer kids today, it's not just the obvious things of the legislation being put in place, the book bans, the limits on gender-affirming care, the dangerous bathroom situations that we put these kids in. Those are all very bad to begin with. It's the implications behind those policies that are often just as dangerous too, because when you tell a group of kids or just any group of people that their very identity is something to be ashamed of, that identity doesn't go away. And I think of myself like I always had this energy inside of me that I just didn't understand. And growing up in the 80s and 90s, on the tail end of the AIDS epidemic, and with all the kind of negative representation in the media that there was of trans people, I I didn't know that I was trans, but I knew that I didn't want to be gay or trans or anything because that would mean I was different. And to be different is to be made fun of by your peers, is to be picked on, is to be bullied. And when you suppress that kind of part of yourself, as I did, that energy doesn't go away. It just gets diverted somewhere else. And often those places are self-destructive. That's where my body image issues came from. That's where my fear of rejection came from. And that hurts people in the long run. It hurts people tremendously in the long run. So like that's like one of the biggest dangers facing kids. It's like convincing them that they don't belong, that their very identity is something to be ashamed of. It's terrible.
Gustavo or Nathan, do you want to reflect on that?
I think I'd probably add to Nora's sharing there that how, especially today, how media has emphasized certain norms and how those norms put those kids in danger as well, because it's not just about local peers establishing what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, but also the broader, media and informational avenues showing what's beauty, what's a man, what's a woman, and people finding spaces in those channels via media to vocalize certain things, that can be very problematic, especially for someone in development. And I think that also relates and speaks to our role as educators, right? It's not just about content. It's not just about acceptance. It's a bigger sort of system where things are integrated and should be a little bit more critically analyzed, because they're not isolated cases. They're much more like community problems. And it speaks to the policies, it speaks to the practices, so I think that's where probably some of the dangers come from as well.
I think as educators, we avoid talking about so many of those issues. I think about a student that was in one of the schools that I worked at, and I knew what the genesis of her depression and anxiety was all about. And yet I didn't want to push it on her. I didn't want to say it to her. I hoped she would say it to me. When I sought advice from fellow educators or from counselors, they said, no, you need to send her to a counselor, which I did. But then the counselor came back and said, well, she's fine. I don't think she's depressed. But the things that she was saying to me were totally different. Like she had a different level of trust. And I regret always that I didn't just go through the conversation with her. And I think lots of times we, as educators, we miss our opportunities to support marginalized students in our schools because we live in this zone of fear that we might not be able to handle that discussion if we get too far into it.
It's tricky because if you push a student too hard with that, if they're trying to figure out their own gender identity and you, like you said, you don't want to put that label on them for them, you'd rather they come to you with it, it can cause damage to that student too. Like in the trans community, there's a term called the egg prime directive, which is like for people who are trans but don't know that they're trans, or they're like thinking about it, they call them eggs, and then when you become trans, you hatch. And the prime directive basically says you don't tell someone that they're trans. They have to discover that they're trans.
Yeah.
Because if you tell someone, oh, I think you're you're trans, or you make some sort of comment that kind of implies that, that could just drive them right back into the closet for years and years and years. And I think if someone had seen that in me as a kid, that probably would have happened to me just because I was so down on myself. It's really tricky for us as educators to navigate that.
So maybe what you're saying, Nora, is that I did the right thing in the first place, because I did talk around it. Like, I talked about myself and lots of my experiences, not just with her, but with her friend group and with the students in her class.
Perfect.
Trying to give her opportunities to say that to me.
Yes.
But
no, that's the right thing to do. Because like, if you can just show that, you know, being different is okay and it's something to celebrate, and you know, that's just an opportunity for us as educators, is just to present art and music and theories and knowledge from all perspectives. Then these students who are kind of feeling that way, or kind of exploring those feelings, then they don't feel that such shame if they feel the same way. And, you know, maybe through being exposed to a piece of art made by a queer filmmaker or a queer musician or whatnot, they see, oh, I see myself in that. And that's a safe place for the student to actually come to these conclusions.
it's a good suggestion.
I remember talking to a student once from a class. We were like, again, queer matters in education for an undergrad, a B.Ed class at university. And this person was like, well, I'll be a math teacher, but like, where's the space for, you know, sexual and gender diversity in math? And I think that speaking to like, it's not just about having the conversation, but it's about opening up the possibilities for that individual to see and normalize sexual and gender diversity in different aspects of life as well. So like, a math problem probably doesn't need to read, you know, Mary and John had 6 apples, but like, you know, kind of make it a little bit more gender neutral and that sort of stuff. And the realization in that student's mind is like, oh, this is it. So I think we also, as educators, we tend to overcomplicate the types of conversations we can be having and the strategies we can be using. I don't know if, you know, you probably relate to that, Jackie, that if we want to go through the conversation, we have to go through it all. But I don't think that sometimes you need to go through it all. It's you know, it's just that openness and that position that you have in your power as an educator to just show different perspectives, and that they can all be right perspectives, that they're not wrong or right. There's like, move away from the binary systems. Maybe Nathan can speak a little bit more to some of these strategies that, you know, the training center has suggested when working with post-secondary and educators as well, to broaden this conversation.
You both have said phenomenal things, so I don't know what I can add additionally. I mean, I think those are all really great things when we think about creating environments that are enabling environments for diversity, and it's a way in which, as you put it, Nora, really presenting the beautiful diversity of life, right? And recognizing that can be that affirmation or that recognition of something within somebody, right? That gives a little bit of permission and a feeling of comfort and recognition. And I think, you know, Gustavo, with your points as well, thinking about those opportunities within curricula, right? Like, what books are you assigning? What sort of conversations are you having with youth? How are we navigating certain conversations or things that are going on? And also, too, I think to your point earlier, Jackie, as well, thinking, you know, students look up to their teachers and educators as supports, as supportive adults. And so they feel that opportunity and that safety to have those conversations with a supportive adult. But often, right, like, you don't have the formal training or the formal supports, and to have those conversations in a way that, you know, maybe feels like you're doing all you can do. But I think, again, that says a lot if a youth is coming to you and kind of talking about things that are going on and looking for those additional supports, or just somebody there that cares and sees them for who they are, I think is huge. I mean, that's a huge thing that was really important for me as a young person growing up. And just those ways in of figuring out who we are as individuals, and how that can be supported by really great educators and really great support staff within the school setting. So I really look at schools as a wonderful enabling environment for queer, non-binary, transgender, and sexually diverse youth. So it's important that we can think about ways in which that we can enable that further.
It's beautiful. And I think it brings me back to a conversation that I had about what is the purpose of education. And if you were to think about that for a second, what we came away with from that conversation was that the purpose is to help students know who they are and help them feel a sense of belonging in their community. And so what we're describing is very much the purpose of education. This isn't like a subtopic or a specific niche for some students. This is for all, and the kinds of practices that benefit queer youth and kids are the kinds of things that teachers should be building in, even if they don't know the identity of a student yet, or the things that they should just be marked by as educators, I think.
Oh, and that's so important too. When you think about the exposure of students to various people of various different backgrounds, and it's not just within the 2S LGBTQIA plus community, but it's also, people who come from different cultures and who have different values and different experiences and whatnot. When I was a young brass player, most of the music that I was exposed to was that of white men, like a lot of dead white men at that. And that is not to diminish any of that music. I love the music of Beethoven, for example. Like, if I love lying out in my hammock and putting on Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, which is it's called the Pastoral Symphony, and just soaking it all in and just feeling the power and the warmth of those sounds. That's all great. But there's music out there that's created by lots of different kinds of people that is also really wonderful, but in different ways. And when students get to see that, and they might see themselves in the creators of this music, that is a powerful message to send students.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. I feel like that's a really nice spot to wrap up. If you had any final thoughts, I don't want to cut us off if anyone has something burning inside of them that they want to share. Now's your chance. Any final thoughts?
I think what Nora just said reminded me of an American teacher that we interviewed for my research. He was at the time married to someone who was not American, and that person was not out to his family in his country. And that family believed that he just had a roommate in America. And, the whole they set up as like they were just roommates. But I think what I probably wanted to say is not every queer kid needs to be out or outed by educators or whoever is trying to have those conversations. Like, we're having those conversations to show that those spaces are safer, not fully safe, but safer. So they have the tools, or they can find the tools then to figure it out when to better come out, if they'll ever come out, and respecting the whole cultural background of those people as well. Because, some of them may never need or may never want to come out as a queer person, and providing those spaces doesn't mean we're getting more people out, but we're just understanding that being queer is dynamic, everybody has their own sort of like experiences in the queer community. Of course, for some, the coming out piece is a lot more visible, harder than for others, right? There's the whole like passing ideas as well when you come out, like especially for people who are cis, like if they're just like sexually diverse, it's a whole different story from non-binary, trans, gender non-conforming individuals. And I mean, just that little bit that I think it would probably be fair to explore and highlight here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's important, especially for teachers listening, that their job isn't to write the story of the student, right? It's to provide the space and the safety that the student can take their own story forward, maybe.
I'll add to that one of the roles of educators, and Gustavo hinted at this earlier on, is to really examine the privileges that they carry into just everyday life, the privileges that they have. And I think about myself with this because, as challenging as it is to transition, and the visible aspect of it, I'm 6'5", like just like talk about clocking someone right away. But like, I still have privileges that a lot of other trans people don't have. I'm white. I came from a fairly, upper middle class family, so I was able to get resources and instruments and everything that I needed. But it's really, transitioning has really made me think about those privileges and how I don't have to deal with the extra layer of things that maybe a person of color does, or someone who is coming from a more challenging financial situation, or maybe is working in a job where they're not supported. But like, I'm very supported here at Brandon University, and I appreciate that. But we need to use our privilege to be advocates for those who don't have those privileges. And that's that can mean showing up to school board meetings, maybe even running for the school board if you need to. Certainly supporting students when they're in times of crisis, writing letters and calling up politicians to encourage them to pass good legislation and not harmful legislation. Like, there's lots of ways that we can use our privileges for good. And like, that's, if you're an ally, that's like the number one thing, is like, be a force for good and stand up for those who don't have as much of a voice as you.
Well, thanks for coming and sharing your perspectives with us. Once again, I've learned so much and lots of things that I'll take away.
Thanks, everyone. It was a great conversation.